Welcome to Unapologetically Sensitive, a place to find connection and a sense of belonging, where you can learn, relate, laugh, and maybe even live a bolder, brighter life. I'm your host, Patricia Young. This is a weekly podcast where we talk about sensitivity and the richness that it adds, the strengths we have because of our sensitivity, and some of the challenges it poses as well. The information in this podcast is not a substitute for help from a licensed mental health professional. Hey there, to the creatives, healers, sensitives, and deep thinkers. Happy holiday season. I hope it's going well. This is just a quick intro. I'm doing a remix of an episode that I released last year during the holidays. It was episode 6, so it was just after I launched. I've cleaned it up a little bit. I haven't listened to the whole episode. There may be more mistakes in it. If you want to go back and listen to episode 6, I reread Sharon's intro 4 or 5 times. I don't know why I didn't catch it and didn't cut it out. It's a little embarrassing. I did cut it out in this one. The only thing I want to let you know is when Sharon and I recorded this, her book was going to be released. It has been published. So at the end of the episode, she talks about her book should be coming out in January. It's already out. So if you really enjoy listening to Sharon and you're interested in her workbook, you can already find it out and online. I think that's it. I'm going to let you listen to the intro, and then I'll come on at the end and give you some more information. In this episode, I speak with Sharon Martin, licensed clinical social worker, and we talk about the holidays. And I made this episode specifically in mind for the upcoming holidays because as highly sensitive people, or just sensitives in general, the holidays can be really overwhelming, overstimulating. There's so many activities to do, and it can be really hard for us to manage, and we end up feeling drained and depleted. So in this episode, we talk about the expectations that we often have going in when we spend time with family. Also, if you're in a family and you feel like you haven't ever really been seen by your family, or you feel like you're not good enough, we talk about if you have family members or relatives who tend to be on the narcissistic side, no matter what you do, it never ends up feeling like you're enough or it's okay. We talk about how to take care of yourself if you're traveling, if you're staying with other people or having people that are staying with you. We also talk about that sense of obligation of what we're supposed to do around spending or spending time with people, or the types of meals that we're supposed to prepare, the gifts that we're supposed to buy. And we talk about other options that may make it more manageable. One of the things that I heard this summer when I was at a retreat is we talk a lot about FOMO, the fear of missing out, but there's also something called JOMO, the joy of missing out. And I really love that thought, especially as a highly sensitive person or a sensitive, that we often get so overwhelmed and overstimulated that sometimes we really enjoy having time to be with ourselves alone or with a few people that we really enjoy. So I would really encourage you to use the mantra of JOMO this season. I want to tell you a little bit about Sharon Martin. She's a licensed clinical social worker and a licensed psychotherapist, mental health writer, media contributor on emotional health and relationships. Her psychotherapy practice is in San Jose, California, and she specializes in helping perfectionists and people pleasers embrace their imperfections and overcome self-doubt and shame. Her own struggle to feel good enough inspired her passion for helping others learn to accept and love themselves. Sharon writes the popular blog Happily Imperfect for PsychCentral.com, and she's the author of the book The CBT Workbook for Perfectionism. Her website is livewellwithsharonmartin.com. Her blog is at blogs.com, psychcentral.com/imperfect/. And you can find all this in the show notes. If you're enjoying the podcast, you can really help me out by sharing it with other people. If you're comfortable rating and reviewing, there are instructions how to do that in the show notes. If you're comfortable reposting on social media, I would really appreciate it. And now, on to the show. Hey, Sharon, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Patricia.
I am so excited to have a chance to talk to you. We've chatted online and on LinkedIn, but we really haven't ever really had a chance to talk directly.
No, so this will be a good opportunity. Well, you'll get to know a lot about me, I think.
Good.
We'll see how much I learn about you, but it'll be fun, I think.
I think a fair amount. It's funny. I've been listening over to some of the episodes and my gremlins are up like, you talk too much. You say too much. I'm not going to change it. I'm just telling on myself. So I think you'll find out a lot about me.
Great.
Sharon, do you identify as a highly sensitive person?
I do. Absolutely.
And when did you learn you were a highly sensitive person?
Hard to say. Maybe about 4 or 5 years ago, well into my 40s, before I really understood what this was all about. When I was growing up, never heard the term. Like I said, well into my adult life, it just wasn't something that I had come across for whatever reason. So at some point it just started to be, I don't know, more mainstream. I feel like there's a lot that can be found online that's written about it now. And it really was sort of the turning point when I read Elaine Aron's book, that it was sort of like, oh, wow, it all clicks. It all fits together. And, now I have something to call this piece of myself, or this sort of framework for understanding different parts of my personality, and, kind of why I do some of the things that I do. So it was really helpful to finally understand that piece, but it was not early in life. So I think I hope it's going to be sort of different for this, next generation of highly sensitive people that have access to all of this information and things like this wonderful podcast, where they can just sort of consume this and hear other people's stories and realize they're not the only one who feels this way.
Yeah. Yeah. I can't remember exactly when I found out. I know I discovered introversion first, and that felt like a real relief. And then it's been less than 2 years since I learned I was a highly sensitive person. So it's also really new to me, but it sure made sense when I looked back over my life to understand why I was the way I was. And it almost helped me to rewrite that story about my life, knowing that this was how I was wired and that there wasn't anything that was wrong with me.
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly how I have felt as well. And the same as you, the term introversion was certainly, more prevalent, but even that, I just think once we all sort of got online, there's pros and cons of that, but just the wealth of information really has made a difference. And I think people who are interested in understanding themselves can get so much information so easily now that I feel like it's really a different experience than it was, when you or I were growing up, and it was, you'd have to go to the library and you'd find maybe there'd be one book or something, about being an introvert. Not a lot that was out there, even though we used the term. It didn't encompass the entirety of the experience either. And I think that was part of it. And I just think we've, as a society, we've definitely made some progress in being, being able to see the strengths in both introverts and highly sensitive people, that I feel like previously it felt like it was really a negative. It was, it was sort of a less than situation where, it felt like it was something that was missing, rather than, oh, there's some great qualities about this, about these traits, and there's some real assets that we can tap into as well.
Yeah. And if people want to get more information, I'm pretty particular about who I send people to, because there are so many people that are talking about highly sensitive people. And I'm sure there are lots of people out there that have great content, but you can go on YouTube. I would stick with Dr. Elaine Aron, Dr. Ted Zeff, the people in the field that really have done the most amount of work. And I think that I feel confident in trusting their information. There's also a podcast called The Highly Sensitive Person, and I can't remember the woman's name. I think it's Kristen, and she has also written a book. And then there's also Sensitive, The Untold Story. Those are all great resources if people are wanting more information. And those folks also have websites. Anyways, What do you think of the term highly sensitive person?
I like it for the most part. For me, it feels true. I do feel like a highly sensitive person, so that really feels like it fits. Like the sensitivity, there's a lot of different components of being a highly sensitive person, and I feel like I feel emotion so deeply. Like that's probably one of the strongest aspects for me, and so the word sensitive really does feel like it fits for me. I don't really have a lot of negative, connotations around the word being sensitive. I know some people do. I think like any term, there's pros and cons. There's, some people like it and some people don't. And we got to kind of just have something that works. And I think it works as well as anything else that I could come up with. So I just like having a term for it, whatever we want to call it. I'm glad there's, that I could say this is what it is rather than it just feeling like this mismatch of things that are different about me.
Sure. I found a lot of comfort in knowing that, yeah, like I said, that there wasn't anything that was wrong with me, that these were innate traits, and that especially now learning what the strengths of them are, it's such a game changer.
Yeah, I think it's such an empowering way to look at this. And it's true. Of so many things in life and just personality traits can be pros and cons, I think, at the extremes of either end. But I think it's the natural inclination of our society in general is to see sensitivity as a weakness or a vulnerability. And so it's nice to see that there's this shift that's going on, for us, HSPs to say, hey, wait, this isn't all a bad thing. It causes, some challenges for us, of course, but there's a lot that we can bring to the table as HSPs too.
Sure. Sharon, I'm going to switch gears now. So at this time that we're recording, Thanksgiving is, it's a week away. So Thanksgiving is next Thursday. We've got the holidays coming up, depending on what you celebrate. It can really be a time of overwhelm, overstimulation. People have to deal with their families, where that can be very triggering, spending money around the holidays, feeling obligated. So the reason why I asked you here today is because I know this is something that you specialize in. And can you help us come up with some ways to navigate through the holidays and have some tools and maybe get through with a little bit more ease?
Absolutely. And I think it's exactly as you described it. There's just so much going on this time of year and all kinds of different kinds of stimulations and things that can be overwhelming. And for each of us, we might be sensitive to different aspects of the holiday season. I think that can be a good place to start, is really to just think about which parts of the holiday experience are the most overwhelming and challenging for you. With that being said, I think one of my favorite, sort of tips to give people is just to remember that you don't have to do everything. You don't have to go to every party that you're invited to, or every family gathering, or every event at your church or your synagogue, every fundraiser or volunteer opportunity that comes your way. And I think the thing about the holidays that's challenging is that so many of these events or gatherings, they're fun, right? They're festive. They're not necessarily things that feel like a lot that are their work, or they feel like a drag, right? So they're things that we sort of, I think, on the surface definitely want to do, but we can't do it all is sort of the bottom line. And just to sort of let that be okay, that you can pick and choose which of these things you want to do. Some you may decide, even things that you've done in the past. I think it's often challenging to say no to things that feel like they've become traditions for your family. But it can be okay to shift and do some modified versions of things as your life changes and as your needs change. So that's definitely a part of it, Patricia, is just being able to say, I've already got 2 events on my calendar this week, and I know that if I add a third, even though the office Christmas party would be fun, maybe that's not going to work for me. Or maybe I need to do that modification where I'm going to just go for a little bit. I'm going to go for part of it. The old trick of go late and leave early works pretty well in a lot of situations. So that can help just sort of limit the time that you are exposed to so much of the stimulation. In addition to that, I think we also know that we need to take a lot of breaks from stimulating events. And so I think of this in a couple of different ways. You're saying Thanksgiving's next week. And so if you're going to be spending extended period of time, with your family, an all day, Thanksgiving event or something like that, you probably want to plan some ways that you can take some breaks during that Thanksgiving day. So that could be things like getting out for a short walk, or it could be volunteering to go to the store to buy some more, whatever, we might need more of. or it might even mean that you're going to actually take a short rest. I mean, that is a possibility, I think, in some families. And I think with a lot of these things, if you kind of get out in front of it and let your family know what you need and what would make the day go more smoothly and easily for you, I think you'll find a lot of times that they can be supportive of the idea that, that you want to go and lie down for 30 minutes or go in the bedroom and close the door and meditate for 20 minutes if that's what is going to help you then come back and, be a part of the family gathering and they can enjoy your presence a little bit longer. And then the other thing that I think often happens over the holidays is there's traveling. And this might be you traveling somewhere else. And I think if you're traveling, I would encourage people to consider staying in a hotel rather than at your family's house. And I know this gets tricky because there are a lot of expectations around it. And you may also just want to spend the extra time with your family at their house. And that's okay. But I just kind of throw that out there as a thought because it is hard to get enough. At least for me, it's hard to get enough alone time and quiet time when I am staying at somebody else's house. And I think the reverse is true. If you're going to have house guests staying with you for several days or a week over the holidays, you also really have to think about how are you going to get that quiet time? How are you going to get some alone time and still feel like you can be a good host or hostess, but you're also taking care of yourself. And that's really the bottom line in all of this with the holidays is that we don't want to forget about ourselves. Of course, so much of the emphasis of the holidays is giving to other people as it should be, but we don't want to give and give and give and accommodate and do what's going to work for everybody else without thinking about how we can take care of ourselves. And like I said, I think often it just requires some modifications. It doesn't have to be a complete overhaul or feel like I have to not do the holidays at all this year. It's not an all or nothing situation. I think there's often ways like some of the things that I mentioned where we can just tweak it a little bit and it can make a big difference for us. And then again, I mean, it probably goes without saying, but we just want to, make sure we're taking care of all of our basic needs when we're in a highly stressed situation. And for some people, I think it truly is a highly stressed situation, for like 6 weeks or so of this holiday season, and that's things like just making sure that you get enough sleep, that you eat healthfully, you get some exercise, drink lots of water, have just downtime for yourself, all the basic, self-care things.
And I think too with travel, this is where I always forget. I have a really good friend who lives internationally and she comes to San Diego twice a year. And she always reminds me because I forget when I travel, like I have to have snacks with me. I need to bring water, especially as HSPs. We tend to get hungry. We get hangry really quickly. And when we're traveling, especially if we've got special dietary needs, it's so important to make sure that we've got snacks and food that works for us. And if we're staying with other people, I think sometimes it's hard for us to want to assert that we have some special needs, but I always talk about the proper care and feeding of the HSP. But I think it's really important that we remember that to function optimally, we've got to have our nutritional needs met. And like you said, make sure that we have time to rest and time to sleep. And so if you're booking flights, if you can, leave time between flights so that the stress of having to catch another flight doesn't create more stress for you.
Yeah.
Just knowing that there are certain things that are going to make us function a little bit better because we're already so conscientious about time and schedules and remembering things that if we can put those little hacks in, I think it helps to ease some of the stress.
Yeah, I think you're right. And two things sort of came to mind. One was about the eating and the food. And I think one of the, we also sort of run into the challenge of the holidays are filled with, lots of tempting, but not very healthful foods for us to eat. And so it's just another, reminder to pay attention to making sure that you are eating things that are going to make you feel good. I mean, obviously we can indulge, some over the holidays, but yeah, especially if you're at somebody else's house. And, what I find is really, I think we often get, we're more concerned about that, or we're anticipating that people are not going to respond well to our special needs, quote unquote. And I think often we think that their response is going to be, worse, or they're going to be upset with us, when often this isn't the case. I think often it just requires us to talk to them about what's happening. And, if we're going to stay with friends and family, I mean, they want you to have an enjoyable time. So I think we all have the same goal. And if we can figure out some ways together that can make it a good experience for everybody, I think it's a win-win. And it's not so much of that their feelings are going to be hurt or they're going to feel put out. If you bring your own, snack food, it doesn't have to be like it's a big insult to them. It's just, it's part of our self-care, just as if, somebody had brought their, medication with them and said, I need to take this medication. Nobody else is going to say, oh, well, that's, you shouldn't be doing that. I don't agree with that. You're just, okay, that's what you need to do. Then let's support that.
Right. I know another thing that can be really helpful is that if you have special dietary needs, if you're going to a party, even if it's not a potluck, you can offer to bring a dish so that there's food there that works for you to have.
Yeah, I think, I think it does depend maybe on your family and your social circle, sort of what the norms are with that. But the people that I spend time with, that's absolutely the norm. And it's totally okay to just bring something, even if you weren't asked to. So yes, I think that can be a really helpful way to handle things too, is, you got to look out for yourself in all of these situations. And then the other thing that came to mind when you were talking about, your friend coming internationally is, I know that I'm very sensitive to the time change, or jet lag. And so I was just thinking, we just had the end of the daylight savings time. And, for me, that 1 hour, really does a number on me. And so I think just to remember that we're often sensitive to those kinds of shifts as well. And so if you're traveling across time zones, we really have to, make sure that we are giving ourselves time to rest before jumping into a new schedule or a jam-packed day of events and things like that.
Yeah. And even as we're talking, I'm thinking that many people don't have the luxury to be able to take flights that have time between connections, or they don't have the time to rest. So just to be aware that if you end up feeling a little bit more edgy or more sensitive or more weepy or more reactive, that's just what happens when the stress goes up and we don't have the time to kind of calm our systems down. So at least just recognizing, this is what's going on because I'm in a new situation and there's a lot going on. I think sometimes even just having that awareness, like, this is that thing that happens again, can be really helpful.
Yeah, I think that's a really nice way to put it, and just very helpful, as a way to just give ourselves some compassion and understanding, rather than, I think we're very quickly go to that sense again of there's something wrong with me. Why am I reacting so strongly? I wish, I could get control of all of this, rather than just saying, this is a normal outcome of the situation for me. And like you said, I mean, whether you can anticipate it or even just in the moment, being able to say, okay, I understand what's going on, can be really soothing.
Yeah. Can we talk a little bit about, I have a number of clients, and it's not uncommon for highly sensitive people to have relatives or people that are close to them that tend to run on the narcissistic side. And so what I'm thinking about, the conversations that I've had with a number of clients about how they manage going home or being with family for the holidays. So my first question is, can you just, in very simple terms, maybe explain what it might look like if you have someone in your family who tends to be more on the narcissistic side, not necessarily clinical diagnostic criteria, but then how do you navigate that? Because what my clients tell me is they feel like whatever they do, it's never okay. It's not enough. It's always about the other person. And they just feel defeated before they even get there.
Yeah. Well, that's a pretty good description of it. It becomes, I think a very one-sided relationship where it feels like the other person's needs become primary, and they also have a very strong reaction when their needs are not getting met. But there's not the give and take in the relationship, that we would want in a so-called healthy relationship where we're both looking out for each other's needs and we're both concerned about each other's feelings. And that's, kind of what I was describing earlier, which is for most people, there is some of that give and take, and you can ask for some of what you need and also give what other people need. There's sort of a compromise that's going on. And I think if you're dealing with somebody that tends towards the narcissistic side, there's no compromise. It's really often their way or the highway. And you do feel bullied and you feel stuck and like you don't have choices, because to upset that narcissistic person, they're just can be very cruel. And I think to, come back to specifically for those of us who are HSPs, we are sensitive to criticism, and it is very painful to have somebody who is angry with us, who is, yelling at us. It is, blaming us. Those things that often are the end result of displeasing somebody who's narcissistic. I mean, those are painful experiences for everybody, of course, but I think this is definitely one of those experiences where I know that I feel that so strongly. It is such a painful experience that I want to do everything I can to avoid it. And so then I think our tendency, again, certainly mine, it's to shrink down, right? It's to become small. It's to, to not rock the boat. It's to not want to say anything. And it's to not want to assert what we need. And when we do that, chances are we're not going to get what we need, which means, we're sort of now, there's another level of suffering that I feel like is added on. I'm not able to go to bed at the time that I want to go to bed, or I'm not able to, eat the foods that are going to make me feel the best, or take the breaks that I need. All that sort of basic self-care stuff that we talked about earlier, may be compromised, right? So now we're just sort of feeling worse and worse and worse, I think, in this experience. And it truly is difficult when you have somebody, especially somebody that, you're very close to, whether it's, a parent or a sibling or an in-law, that you kind of feel trapped, I think, on the holidays, into feeling like I've got to spend time with these people. But it's a really unpleasant experience for me.
Yeah. So do you have any advice of what you would tell somebody who's going into those situations? Again, what I hear is, no matter what I do, it's never okay. That I'm criticized for this, I'm criticized for that, I'm compared to this relative, and then they turn around and say something terrible about the relative I was just compared with. That people end up feeling really powerless in these situations.
So yes, I think the first thing that I would stress with folks is we have to have realistic expectations. If this has been a pattern, with your family for years, don't expect it to be different this year, in the sense that they are the same people that they were last Thanksgiving or last Christmas. That then, and again, we can, we don't want to look at that as sort of, oh, poor me, and I'm the victim of this, tyrant who is exactly the same as they've always been. But I think knowing that and having realistic expectations allows you to say, okay, given the reality of this situation, what are my options? What are some ways that I can look out for myself? And here's the hard part is, if you're dealing with somebody who is never pleased, no matter what you do, I think, again, this is difficult, but I think to be realistic about it, we have to some extent say, well, I'm going to choose to do the things that are best for me, even if they displease somebody else. Because I also know that if I did the other thing, they're going to be displeased also.
Right. What I often talk to clients about is there are two kinds of discomfort. There's the familiar discomfort of not pleasing the person, or the unfamiliar discomfort of taking care of yourself and having to deal with a new kind of discomfort. And so which one would you rather sit with?
Right. And I think chances are, it's not going to happen just in the course of, one holiday season or a short period of time. But we all know that, generally, if we practice a new behavior, it becomes more comfortable over time. And so, if we can move towards, the option of doing what's right and healthy for us, it will become more comfortable for us eventually. And at least we are taking care of ourselves. So we should be getting some of those benefits as well.
Right. And I love your concept of really seeing what the limitations are of the person or the situation. That I've never gotten what I want from this person. I'm probably never going to be able to get it. So I call it kind of putting on your game face or your Stepford wife face. we armor up just a little bit because this isn't a place where we're going to be seen or validated or get our needs met. It's not a place where we're going to get that depth of processing and that sense of connection. And I think we often have unconscious expectations that this time I'm finally going to be seen and appreciated for who I am. So if we kind of go in kind of with a poker face and have exchanges that are pleasant, but kind of know what the landscape is and what the limitations are, that we don't have our heart out on our sleeve and we don't end up feeling hurt and disappointed again for one more year.
Yes, I think that's really helpful. Yeah, just to remember that we know, who you're dealing with, I think, ultimately. And, we do need to make some adjustments around that. And, it's a little bit of sort of like know your audience here. And if you know that your parents have never been able to understand your sensitivity and they've always been critical of you, then that is what you're going to get. And so I find that often to get to that place, there really is some grieving, that has to happen because you really are letting go of, the desire, for your parents, almost the fantasy for them to be a particular way, to sort of be the loving, accepting, nurturing people that you hoped or that, we're told that, that parents should be this way. So we're sort of, when you accept reality, there is sometimes that sense of loss that, okay, now I'm truly going to accept that they're never going to be that way. And that's sad.
Yeah, it's funny. That's exactly what I was thinking before you were saying it, because I think it's sometimes hard to know where the listeners are in their process. And what I often see is people are still expecting or having that fantasy that their parents are going to be able to see them in the way that they've never been able to be seen. And yeah, it's really devastating when you finally get that it's not you, it's them, and that your parents aren't going to be able to provide what you've been longing for and craving for, and they just don't have it.
Right. It is a hard, it's like you were saying, it's this strange sort of phenomenon where it ends up feeling like, first it feels like there's something wrong with me, and that's a terrible feeling. And then to realize, no, I'm okay, and there's something lacking with them is also a terrible feeling, right? It is just a rough situation. And I think, again, sometimes the best that we can do is really just to love ourselves through it and to just keep, saying it is so hard. This is a really difficult situation. It would be difficult for anybody to be in this situation. And, I didn't cause this situation. I can't sort of exactly fix it, but I can do some things to make it more manageable for myself. And that's probably the best that we can do.
Yeah. And the hope in that for people, if that is the place that you're at in your process is, you go through that sadness and that grief, but then you also learn to really embrace the qualities that you have. And then you have an opportunity to create a new family around you. You find your tribe and people who really do get you. And while it may not be your family of origin, the people that you were born into a family with, you have a beautiful opportunity to find a community and create a community of people that really see you and get you and honor exactly who you are. So there is hope if you're in that place where it just feels like, it's not me, it's them. And now what?
Yeah, that just really brought a smile to my face when you said that. Because it does feel so hopeful. And sometimes I suggest to people also that, if they're at a larger family gathering, is to, to think about, is there somebody in this extended family or group of people who are going to be there that would be an ally? Maybe it's not your parents who are the ones you hoped for to be the supporters, but there might be another family member or perhaps your spouse or, somebody that can be that person for you. And yeah, I think so many of us embrace the idea too that, we need to connect with people who really get us. And, that's not necessarily the family that we were brought up with or the family that we married into for that matter. And that's a good reminder too, I think, as a different type of self-care during the holiday season is to make sure that you are making some time to spend around those truly supportive people. that I think sometimes that can get lost in the shuffle if you feel like there's a lot of obligations and a lot of, family events that you need to go to. Sometimes I think, especially as HSPs, our tendency is say, okay, I need some time to myself. And that may be very true, but we may also benefit from some small group time with that tribe too.
Mm-hmm. I hadn't really thought about this consciously, but at some point along the way, I figured out that 2 events a day is my good sweet spot. Any more than that generally is too much. And well, now that I'm getting older, less than that I'm happy with. But I think it's really important to kind of start paying attention to how many events, can you do in a day that still leave you feeling like you've got some energy and you're not drained, and also the length of time. Because many of us who didn't know that we were highly sensitive for many years have just learned to push ourselves to the point of exhaustion. And then it takes a couple days to recover. So if we can start using this time now to start tuning into when do we notice our energy starting to dip, and are we able to pull back, and how much time have we been out, to start getting an idea of kind of, how far does our energy gas tank take us? And, can we get home before we run out of gas?
Well, I'm not entirely sure what you're considering an event, but I was thinking, what, 2 events a day, that would kill me. That's way too much for me. Again, it may depend what our definition of the event is, but I'm kind of one event per weekend kind of person. That's really all I really want to do.
Yeah.
I need a lot of time alone. Well, no, not parties.
I don't think I'm talking about parties.
I would certainly. I may be more content spending more time by myself than you are, perhaps.
Yeah, I have a pretty strong need for connection, but it's got to be in very small, specific venues. But, big groups of people, doesn't do it for me. I'm wondering if we can switch gears. I'm thinking about, I know many people feel really obligated over the holidays, and often people spend beyond what they have, either by entertaining or by buying gifts or getting outfits for events. That sense of, I'm only going to be good enough if I can show up in a way that I think I'm supposed to. And then people violate their own values and it doesn't work. Can we talk a little bit about that and how people can maybe figure out if that's going on for them and make some different choices?
Yeah, I'm not sure if I've actually thought too much about that side of things. But I guess sort of what comes up for me is just the feeling of, what is it that I'm doing that maybe doesn't align with, maybe my values. That may be, too strong of a word, but maybe my priorities, maybe that's a better word. Again, as we keep having this conversation, I think a lot of it comes back to recognizing that we all have our limited resources, right? And this is true for, everybody non-HSPs as well, energy and time and finances and so on. And we need to prioritize where we are going to use those resources. So perhaps, it's sort of looking at, what am I spending my money on? Are these the things that truly feel the most important? Or what are the things that I am spending my energy on? What relationships am I, investing in? Are those the most important to me? Does that kind of speak to what you were asking?
I feel like I have an idea in my mind and I didn't talk to you about it ahead of time. And so I feel like I kind of set you up. So I'm just being aware of that. And I'm leading you down a path without telling you that this is the path we were going to go down.
You can lead me down there. I might just need a little more leading.
Okay. So what I often see is that sense of, people have nieces and nephews or cousins or aunts, and that feeling of, I have to, it's almost an internal sense of this is what's expected. Yeah. And I don't think that people are even consciously aware that they're violating their own values, but that sense of it has to be enough. Or if you've got kids, what is enough? I want to show my kids that it's enough. Or if they grew up not having enough, that the way they want to show their love is by having abundance. But it really is not in alignment with what their values are. But I don't think that there's a lot of awareness of this is what my budget is. This is what I want to spend. But people just feel that this is what you're supposed to do without even recognizing that there's a pull there. And I know you do so much work with codependency. I think that's the part that I haven't said to you out loud that I'm thinking of how codependency weaves itself into it and we don't even know that it's going on.
Yeah. Okay. That does make it a little bit more clear. And the word,
you can't read my mind.
The word that keeps coming to my mind is obligation, is that, we feel like we have to do these things, that people are expecting us to do these things, or we have internally set this expectation. Sometimes it's us who are doing this to ourselves. But we do get so much input, of course, from the media in, society, like the messages of what we're supposed to do, how many presents are supposed to be under the tree, how many, people, what your Thanksgiving table should look like, all of this. Like there's so much that I think we are not even consciously aware of how much an impact of that has on us in terms of setting those expectations, that it really feels like to do anything other than that, other than the picture that you see on TV or in the magazine is wrong, or maybe it's an inadequacy, like to say, either I can't afford that, or even just to say, I'm choosing not to spend my money on that, ends up again feeling like well, what's wrong with you? Why aren't you going along with what you're supposed to do? Why do you have to be different? Right. Mm-hmm. And so it is a tough thing to sort of, come up against those expectations and those obligations and to say, I would like to do something different. Because again, I think so much of it is if you feel like you have been doing it this way year after year, there are, the rest of the family is expecting you to bake those cookies and, wrap those presents and, do whatever those things are, that it takes both, like you're saying, it takes the awareness of saying, hey, these things aren't really working so well for me. They're not really filling me up and making me feel good and joyful this holiday season. And then you have to be able to assertively let people know, hey, I'm going to be making a change this year. I'm not going to be doing, the big Thanksgiving dinner, and I'm not going to be buying hundreds of dollars of presents. I'm going to, do something else instead, because there's that fear of disappointing people. And I think that's such a strong deterrent for a lot of people, is the fear. I don't want people to be upset with me. And again, I think we have to know our audience. You have to know your family here. Is that I think sometimes that fear is unwarranted, and that's our internal stuff. And other times it may be accurate because from the past that there has been a big blowback on you doing something like that. But as we discussed earlier, that doesn't necessarily mean you shouldn't do it or you can't do it. It just means you need to prepare yourself so that you can anticipate what the response is going to be and have a plan for how you're going to take care of yourself and love yourself through that challenge.
Yeah. And I'm thinking too that it might be in not in all situations, but in some situations, it really might be an opportunity for a family to collectively decide, well, maybe we'll just pick one name and everybody, picks one person that they buy a little bit of a bigger gift to, or maybe we want to go volunteer on a holiday instead of giving each other gifts. Or it does create the opportunity to maybe collectively, because sometimes other people are feeling the same way and nobody's willing to say anything because in some families, how things look is really important. So there is the possibility that you could be someone who really could initiate great change in your family, or once again, they look at you and can't figure out where the heck you're coming from because you've always been the weirdo that hasn't fit in. I mean, you need to evaluate the situation. But
I agree with you on that. So true that sometimes those old traditions, I feel like sometimes families as a group have sometimes outgrown them, and I think there's something that just sort of naturally happens, as families go through sort of the stages of life. You're going to naturally have, different traditions are going to work in a family with young children than, when your children are college age. Things need to shift. And I think sometimes we don't know how to shift. We sort of get stuck in the tradition, which is, in some ways it's an obligation when it's not a tradition that's really working for you anymore. But I think, like you said, oftentimes you're not the only one. But it's hard to be the one to vocalize it and to say, hey, how about if we do a potluck this year instead? I think oftentimes there is space for those kinds of shifts to happen. But, even if your idea, falls flat and everybody thinks it's a terrible idea, I guess you can still try to make, some modifications on your own. I guess in any group, it's hard to get consensus. Or, change is hard for everybody, right? And so,
Yeah.
I think the other thing that sometimes happens is that if you're thinking about making a change, probably you have given it a lot of thought before you actually say it to somebody else, especially a family member. And I think we also have to remember that we then need to give them time to really think about that and digest it. Because like for me, I think, before I would have said that, I might have been thinking about it honestly for the whole year or even for several weeks or several months before I actually said it to somebody. And then, I think it's not a good expectation to then just think that they're immediately in that moment going to say, oh yeah, great idea. Let's do that. We need to give them, I think, that same opportunity to think it over, consider, and not put them on the spot either to, make a decision.
Yeah, I have someone in my life that whenever I bring up anything, that I always immediately get a negative response. And I've just learned that I need to allow the negative response and let the idea filter down. And then this person generally comes around. But until I figured that out, it was really hard.
Yeah, that's a great example of the negative first. And then sometimes, people will just sort of come around it. They just sort of need that time. Yeah. And again, I mean, they may not. And, we have to accept that as well. But yeah, it just occurred to me that I know that, I will be thinking about things for a long time. And then I sort of forget that the other person hasn't been thinking about it for a long time too. And like, we're really at two different places with it. And it's like, I got to give them time to kind of catch up to where I am with it.
Right. Sharon, I'm looking at the time and I'm feeling torn because there's so much more about this I want to talk about, but I want to try and stick to our time constraints. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit. What are some of the challenges that you experience as a highly sensitive person?
Gosh, I feel like there's been a lot. Well, like I had mentioned earlier, I think one of the biggest challenges for me is that I feel things so deeply, which means it takes very little for me to have a very strong emotional reaction to things, which has been challenging. Like, I just feel like I am the person who just cries all the time at everything. And, just hearing and, getting a lot of emotional input, it's very draining for me. And I really need to be careful about that. So like I was saying before too, I think I had this real sense that crying was a bad thing. Maybe not entirely, but definitely in certain situations, or that I should be able to kind of control that better. So I feel like I sort of will, kind of flop between the two extremes, which is just feeling so tender and so vulnerable, and so sensitive to things. And then the way that I coped with that for so many years was to just try to shut it all off and to not feel things and to, not let emotions in and not kind of, to sort of put up the walls, I guess I would say is maybe a good way of thinking about that. And sometimes that really was not letting people in and not really sharing, I think, a lot of who I am. So I think that has not worked really well, to be in sort of those extremes with it. So it's much better to, it's a work in progress, but to still, be kind of coming to that place of a self-acceptance that I am a sensitive person. And people who know me well and spend a lot of time with me, they know that. My kids know that I will cry at pretty much every movie we ever see.
My guess is so that the corresponding strength is that you're probably incredibly compassionate and empathic, and people feel safe coming to you because they know that you can hold a space for that tenderness and that you really have an ability to connect deeply with people, especially on a very tender and vulnerable level.
Yeah. And I think that has been a great asset in my work as a therapist, of course. I mean, those are, sort of those core skills that we want any therapist to have. So yeah, it's definitely been helpful. And I think that's definitely, drawn me to this field. Yeah. Like I said, I mean, it just, I just need to be mindful of, how much, I feel like sort of how much of the world's suffering that I, expose myself to.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's so much of it that, even just the news is often overwhelming for me because it's bad news.
I don't even watch the news because I'm so deeply impacted. And when there are lots of tragedies that are going on, I can't. It's not that I don't care. It's that it will wreck me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think for those of us that are therapists, and I don't know that we recognize it, for those of us that are therapists that are also highly sensitive people, I think the amount of compassion and empathy and understanding that we have for our clients, I mean, I think therapists in general tend to have this, but I would suspect that the HSP therapists really are able to amp it up on a whole new level. And because of our own experiences with the wounds that we've had, we just bring that much more to our clients because of our own experience and our awareness and our tenderness.
Uh-huh. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I don't know how many. I feel like there are a lot of therapists that are HSPs. I don't know if anybody's ever done any research to try to figure out. I'm sure it's a disproportionate number, though, that I do think that we often use our strengths, maybe not all as professional therapists, but in, a lot of compassionate professions, because we are absolutely, we're very empathetic people. And so, we want to help people. We feel their pain and we understand it.
Right. Well, what Dr. Aaron says is that HSPs tend to be the healers, the artists, the creatives, the social justice makers, the teachers. So, I think that those values that drive us, when we can find professions that are in alignment with that, it really ends up creating an avenue for us to give what our gifts are.
I agree.
Sharon, what do you do for play?
Well, I knew you were going to ask me that. My first thought was, what do you mean by play? This is my tendency to overthink it and go, really be like, well, what does that mean? Is what really counts as play? There are things that I like to do for fun and enjoyment. Whether they're play, I'm not sure. Play seems more relaxed, like playful, obviously. So anyway, I'm going to tell you the things, but I'm also just sort of the parameters around this. I feel like the things that I choose to do for fun are still kind of constrained. I have a hard time just really letting go of like all rules and expectations. So I like to do some things that are creative, like some crafting things I really have enjoyed. And I like to do things like writing, creative writing, as well as, professional writing. That I'm not saying is play.
I think it is, though.
Maybe to some extent. So I like to make things. Like I would say, even like cooking and, baking and things like that are often feel like play. Yeah. Like, and again, I don't know if this is really play exactly, but, I just like to, hang out with some girlfriends and talk, do things like that.
Yeah. It's interesting. Most times when I ask people this, they laugh. And when I had a friend interview me for an episode, which we didn't air because the sound quality was just, it wasn't acceptable. Knowing the question was coming, my first response was to laugh. And I think because we are such deep thinkers and processors, that the ways that we play are not what we consider play. But what I'm finding is I think anytime that our minds are involved in projects that stimulate us, and that could be cooking, baking, cleaning, gardening, creative projects, writing, working, that is play for us. And because we're wired so differently, that we have this idea of what play looks like. And I think once we know like, oh, this is play, it puts a whole new spin on it. But I think so many times we've been told, like, you can't take a joke, you're not very fun. And most of us have a wicked sense of humor as well.
Yeah, that is interesting about the sense of humor, but that's probably a conversation for another another day.
Yeah.
I definitely feel like I am by nature that more serious, more contemplative person. And I think often, the things that I will choose to do for fun or pleasure are things that I would do that are solitary. Not all of them, but a good chunk of the, things that I would choose as playful activities would be things that I would do by myself, which I think kind of goes against the general idea of what we think of as play. But I don't know. In my mind, I sort of think of, play as something that's more interactive with other people. Well, maybe not always.
But it sounds like to me that that's looking through the lens of our culture's view of extroversion, that play has to be something with other people, where if you look at it from honoring our needs as a highly sensitive person, that we get overwhelmed and overstimulated and over-aroused. So part of how we regenerate is by having time alone if we're more on the introverted side. And that is replenishing and nourishing. But just culturally, it's kind of, I keep thinking of the word like how our society is so ableism. Everybody's supposed to be the same and be neurotypical and be an extrovert. And it's like, so many of us aren't, but we still internalize those values. So you spend time alone doing things that's really pleasurable and regenerating to you, but it doesn't feel like it counts because you're not with somebody else.
One of the things that, that has really helped me as I have learned to understand myself better is really being able to have a clearer sense of what I like to do and what I don't like to do. And a little bit like what you were saying, I mean, I think for a long time I felt pulled that there were certain things that I should like because everybody else liked doing them. And now I'm just much happier to say, I don't really like that activity. I'm not going to do it. And, and sometimes that is like, I will just stay home if my husband is going to go do something. And that works fine for us. It's not a pleasant experience for me to go and do an activity that I'm not interested in. It's not going to be fun for me. I would be very happy, to stay home and do my own thing. But I think for a long time, I felt like, I really should like doing these things. And so that has been a good piece of learning for myself, is that just because everybody else thinks it's fun, it doesn't have to be fun for you. You can choose. And again, there's doesn't have to be judgment around it, that, what's wrong with you that you don't like doing this activity.
Yeah, definitely. Sharon, why don't you tell us about the projects that you're working on or where people can find you?
Sure. Well, my website is livewellwithsharonmartin.com. So there you can find all of my stuff. Well, the most recent project that I have been working on is a book. It's a workbook. It's called the CBT Workbook for Perfectionism. And it's done on my end, just waiting for it to be printed up. The publication date is January 2nd, although the publisher tells me it should be out hopefully a couple of weeks before that. So probably in another month or so that will be available.
That's incredibly exciting.
Yeah, it's exciting.
Yeah. Sharon, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. I think this has been a great conversation. I hope that the listeners got some good tips and ideas of how to make the holidays a little bit more peaceful and happy.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here.
Well, thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thanks, you too.
Hey again. I hope you found that helpful. Stay tuned because I have a special offer for free registration for the HSP course. I know the holidays can be challenging for many people. I'm hoping that some of these episodes are helping you to navigate some of the difficulty. Some of us find a lot of joy in the holidays. Some of us hate the holidays. For some of us, it's a mixed bag. My hope is that you're managing through the holidays and having some amounts of peace and serenity. What I would encourage you to think about is to notice what are the things that you're struggling with, and are these things that maybe next year can be done differently. Sometimes we're in situations and it just stinks and there's really nothing that we can do about it. So I want to be really mindful about that. But in December is when I tend to reflect on the year and I start thinking about what I want to create more of in the following year. And I'm currently working on that. As soon as I have some tangible thoughts together, I will share more of that with you. But one of the big things is I'm really working on this wound of not enough and too much, and really reframing it that people are really blessed to have me in their lives, and that I really have depth and a lot of vulnerability. And if you're close to me, I really share pretty intimately, because I tend to have this ongoing narrative of I'm bugging people, I'm too much, and that really just doesn't serve me. So it's an opportunity to see what are the things that you tell yourself, what are you creating in your life, and what do you want to create more of in a positive way or less of in the following year. I am going to be gifting one free registration for one of the online HSP courses. So if it's something that you're interested in, send me an email at unapologeticallysensitive@gmail.com. This is the really important part. Please choose which course you want to be gifted, because the courses are filling up and I need to make sure that there's space in the course. Because I want everybody to be a good fit for the group, if you apply for a free registration, I'm going to send you an intake screening form that will help me see if you're a good fit. On Sunday, January 12th, 2020, I will be sending an email out letting you know if you are the person who has been selected for the online course. I'm going to play you a little bit of a clip from somebody who took the course that has some feedback about the course. I think these are really powerful courses. If you're interested in working with me individually, you can get more information at unapologeticallysensitive.com. If you want information about the HSP online course, go to the HSP group page. And here, let me play you this clip right now. And this is Melissa, who just finished one of the courses.
I would have never taken this course. I am an incredibly frugal person, downright cheap. What I would say to people who don't want to take the course, to spend the money, I would say think back to the first time you learned the term HSP and what it meant. And you had that oh my gosh, that's what it is moment. Take that. And if that was significant for you, then this course will change your life. If you're like, oh, I don't know if I'm an HSP or not, it's going to help you to really understand it. Because my husband is still not completely sure that he's an HSP. I think even if he isn't, he's still a very sensitive person, and this still helped him very much. When I learned the term, I was like, oh my gosh, that's it. The course gave me so much more than I was learning in the books. Even though the information was there, it was just kind of being able to integrate it and figure out how to use that information in a way that, for me, became very life-changing.
I know it can be a big investment. I know when I wanted to invest in the podcasting course, I really wasn't sure. It felt like a lot of money. I remember calling my husband crying, asking if I did it and I didn't follow through, would it be okay? I know that Melvin Varghese, who is the podcast host of Selling the Couch, who runs the podcasting course, actually reached out to me, and I had a chance to talk with him, and that really helped me seal the deal. It really felt like he cared about what was going to work for me. He was very invested. He's offering something else. I have a call with him tomorrow. And I love how Melvin models authenticity and vulnerability, and I really learned from him. If you're wanting to take the course and you're having considerations, you're not sure if it's going to be worth it, you're not sure if you want to do it, the money's an issue, please feel free to reach out to me at unapologeticallysensitive@gmail.com. If I'm able to work with you, I really think that there's so much value in this course. You've heard from people who've taken the course that said it's really changed their life. There's something about being in a group of HSPs in a supportive environment where we get to see what's coming up for us, what's holding us back. But the power of the group, I can't even put words to it. So if there's any way that I can support you, I really do care. And I wouldn't be doing this if I didn't feel it was valuable. And there is a money back guarantee. I hope you're having whatever kind of holiday you're having. I hope you're having a tremendous amount of self-compassion for whatever's coming up for you. Remember, sensitivity is nothing to apologize for. It's our superpower. Have a blessed day.